Psychologists of Reddit, what's the most interesting case you have worked on? Schizophrenic woman had been trying various medicines for years to manage it. When she turned around 45 or 50 she had a stroke that cured her schizophrenia. Working with a few different conspiracy groups and seeing people get into fights over whether it was Satanists or transhumanists who did 9/11. Believe you me, it's hard to keep a straight face when you get told it was bionic super soldiers posing as radical Islamic terrorists. My father was a nurse in a psych ward during his education. He always told me about this one guy who would compulsively drink water 24/7. He would drink so much water that it threatened his health. He was so manic about drinking water that they couldn't let him out of their sight because he would run off and drink water. They even had to follow him into the bathroom to stop him from drinking water from the sinks and toilets. I worked in a residential facility. One kid had pica. He liked to eat his puke and poop. They gave him crackers to put his poo on to hopefully transition him from poo to crackers. Cognitive neuroscientist/neuropsychologist here. I don't do therapy, but I work in research with individuals who suffer from body integrity dysphoria, formerly known as body identity integrity disorder, who usually have an intense desire to amputate a limb, be paralyzed, or blind. One guy contacted me once telling me he has an intense desire to become tetraplegic, paralyzed from the neck down, and if I could help him. Unfortunately I couldn't, since there's no cure yet, and we don't provide services for them to become, well, disabled. So this happened on my psychiatry rotation in medical school. Recently graduated but haven't started residency yet. There was a patient at an inpatient psychiatric facility for suicidal ideation. She constantly insisted that she had a mass on her breasts and demanded to be physically examined only by male doctors. When the psychiatrist I was rotating under declined to perform a physical exam, she asked me to do it during my daily patient interview. I also declined physical exam, but had a bit of a hunch to check her medical records. It turned out she had an ultrasound done a week before that found only normal breast tissue without masses. However, apparently this lady had frequented many doctors' offices with various complaints of an unspecific nature and would usually focus on breasts or vaginal complaints when she visited male physicians' offices. We diagnosed her with factitious disorder, formerly known as Munchausen syndrome, and histrionic personality disorder. It seems her goal was mostly attention from medical professionals. She had lots of issues, but we also had to be careful to make sure she wasn't fishing for a lawsuit. Patients like her are why doctors document everything meticulously. I've had my fair share of mental hospital visits from ages 15-21. I've seen a whole lot from adolescent units and adult units, but my last visit I was introduced to a whole new issue these hospitals deal with that I was completely unaware of until now. When a patient has an episode or cannot be restrained they get a shot. Patient slang for this is booty juice, as it's usually a sedative administered by injection on the ass. One night a girl, 18 years old, one of the youngest in the unit, decided since she couldn't sleep she was going to walk into the hallway after lights out and cause a scene. This was not the first time she was an issue. She was always finding some way to bother the staff, no matter what unit she was in, no matter what time of day it was. But this time she was intentionally raising hell in hopes of getting this sedative injected so she could sleep. Maybe it's my fear of needles or lack of understanding when it comes to the mind of an addict, but to purposefully cause a fight or throw a tantrum just to be shot with a sedative was beyond something my mind was able to understand. And other patients soon followed suit, talking about how if they can't sleep they'll just make sure they get injected with that sedative, or how they would enjoy it, so getting booty juiced was something they wowed want. It blew my mind. Fellow mental hospital patient. I am, or rather, was, depressive, but in a closed psychiatric facility in 2 occasions. Once this was because I had myself committed, because I was suicidal, and once because there wasn't any space in any other kind of clinic, for 4 weeks total. So I have a few stories that fit this. My roommate watched me brush my teeth on one occasion. While I'm doing this, I realize that he's staring at me. I try to ignore it. Then I realize he's staring at my toothbrush. He then tells me, "You shouldn't stick your lightsaber in your mouth." Okay then. There was a former soldier with PTSD that shared a room with me for a few days. I slept with earplugs during this time because he snored, so I only heard this story from fellow patients, and I'm not sure it wasn't exaggerated, but something close to it must have happened, because I did see the destruction afterward. Guy with PTSD can't sleep, so he goes to the duty nurse for sleep meds. Duty nurse at the time was a major asshole, not because she wouldn't give you meds if you asked. After all, she's more qualified than you to decide whether you should be given something or not, but because she treated you like an 8-year-old when you did ask, and not everyone in that facility had the mental faculties of an 8-year-old. Thank you very much. Anyways, she tells him that he can't have sleeping meds, he should try and sleep without them first. So the guy starts pacing up and down in the hallway. She comes and tells him that he needs to go sleep and that he's disturbing other patients, but he ignores her. She grabs him by the arm, and the guy completely flips, breaks the nurse's arm, and tosses her into a wall, beats up 2 more hospital staff and 2 policemen that the hospital staff called to the scene. Then the head doctor of the station gets called in. He was off shift when this happened, goes up to the guy telling him something about having a drink with an old comrade, and gives the guy one of those plastic medicine things that look like shot glasses with a massive dose of diazepine or some such. He drinks it and eventually keels over. Again, don't know if it actually went down like this, but I do know the nurse with the broken arm was fired for mistreatment of patients and the hallway looked like it had been the site of a serious fight. The staff was cleaning bloodstains the next morning. The handrails had been ripped out of the wall, and another piece of drywall somewhere looked like someone had been thrown through it. I slept through the whole thing thanks to earplugs. There was one of those sliding fire gates that could be shut by pressing a button that could seal off part of the station, a part that was used for daytime activities and no one slept in. During the night, 2 manic patients were wandering around because they couldn't sleep, because that happens when you're manic, and one patient shut the other behind the fire door. The patient that was shut in started yelling help, help, in this really eerie voice that convinced other patients the place was haunted. Some of the Senna patients, when we were close to getting released, got permission to go watch a movie at the local theater. We came back home at 11 am, and as we walked in, someone made a really good joke, so we were all laughing our asses off. Night security guard sees us trying to get into the elevator and comes running. What are you doing here? Me. We are patients from the psych ward. Yeah. We ended up basically getting held by the security guard until some hospital staff came along and confirmed we said who we were. We had a lot of fun pretending to actually be insane in the meantime, asking the security guard whether it was normal to be hearing voices and telling him hotel service sucked in this place and whether this was an airport and at what time the next flight to Timbuktu would leave, etc. etc. I think he was glad to be rid of us at the end. The hospital staff was not amused, but then this wasn't the first thing like this, because a few of us eventually decided we are already in the nut house. This is our chance to do crazy stuff and get away with it, because everyone already thinks we are insane. Doctor later told me that this type of behavior is called cathartic mania, might not be the official term. I'm German, and happens to a decent fraction of patients in the process of recovering from a depression. Basically means you show manic behavior for a short period after recovering from a depression, but this goes away pretty quickly. One patient took out his dentures and put them in the dishwasher to clean them. When told that this wasn't a good idea, he cleaned them over the water fountain instead. A different time we got to go out, someone else went and told the hospital staff afterward that I tried to jump in front of a bus. I did no such thing and was feeling well enough that I had absolutely no inclination to do so at the time. I still got 2 hours of one-on-one therapy with the head doctor, who kept telling me that they could only treat me if I was truthful with them. Blah, blah, blah. The other patient eventually admitted to lying. Luckily, girl kept spitting water at me over dinner or splashing me with it. Eventually, I got fed up and dumped a carafe with several liters worth of water on her. Another patient is like, hey, wet t-shirt contest. Staff was not amused because they had to clean up the mess. Someone dumped water into every bed on the station. Not a little bit of water either, but enough to soak them all. No one ever figured out who it was. I had the theory that this was because whoever had done it couldn't remember having done it and was therefore unable to give him/herself away. Went to step into some elevator at one point, was frantically waved off by a doctor standing inside. Standing inside with the doctor, I only got one glance as the elevator door closed, was someone who'd attempted to slit his throat, but bungled the attempt. From the amount of blood it looked to me like he should been lying on a stretcher. No idea what was actually going on there, but that image won't leave my mind in a hurry. Had a woman, married, 10 years older than me, and in there, because of postpartum depression, hit on me. It got so obnoxious that the doctors transferred her to a different ward, so we wouldn't meet anymore. I'm a psychotherapist, read, therapist with a master's degree, not a PhD. I worked with a schizophrenic gentleman years ago who could answer questions only in the form of pun, play on words, or all-out jokes. You knew he was having a bad day when his jokes were off color or straight up lewd. He was doing well when the jokes were of a PG nature. He told me one of my favorites. Why doesn't North Dakota have a professional football team? Because then Minnesota would want one too. I had a friend who had a sleep disorder that allowed him to move around like he's awake. For that, he has to lock all the knives away before sleeping, because he's woken up with a knife on his hand before. He's also woken up in a different part of the city and couldn't remember how he got there. I'm not a psychologist, but a friend of mine was in a psychiatric and told me that an 11-year-old girl there always talked about Satan and that only she knows how he really looks like, etc.